We have breaking news powered by BetUS TV regarding your Portland Trail Blazers, as general manager Joe Cronin has agreed to a multi-year extension to remain the general manager of your Portland Trail Blazers. Shams Charania broke the news on Twitter with a tweet that reads as such: Portland Trail Blazers general manager Joe Cronin has agreed to a multi-year contract extension with the franchise, sources tell ESPN. Blazers have 35 victories, a 14-win improvement so far, and are 22-16 since January 19th, while ranking top 5 in defensive efficiency during that span. Now, we do not know for how long this contract extension is, but Joe Cronin will remain the general manager of your Portland Trail Blazers for quite a while, at least until probably this ownership group turns things over, sells the team, and the new ownership group would bring in maybe their own guy. I don't know. But Joe Cronin is here to stay. In reading Shams' article, it's a lot of praise for trading Damian Lillard and then winning 35 games a couple years later. Truthfully, I think Joe Cronin is still unproven. The first half of his tenure is him failing to improve the team around Damian Lillard, and then the second half of his tenure has been a rebuild that took a step forward this year, but is by no means complete. The Blazers aren't even a play-in team. He's done some nice things. I think the Avdija trade was the best move that he's made and really has helped this rebuild. They've looked better since the new year. As Shams Charania has stated, since January 19th, the Blazers are 22-16. They actually have a winning record over the past 2.5 months. However, I've given my thoughts on this multiple times. I think the Blazers are better than last year, but not good enough to really make any changes to their long-term plan. The Blazers have done a good job of beating bad teams. They've graduated from that class of bottom feeders. They're now above that class of bottom feeders. They keep beating those bottom feeders. But the Blazers still have a pretty poor record against good teams. They still struggle to beat above 500 teams. And what that means is the Blazers are stuck in the middle right now. Not good enough to seriously contend for a playoff spot. That's why they're 12th in the West. But not bad enough to tank, and that's why they have the 9th best odds right now. That could even fall because they have the same amount of wins as the Phoenix Suns, which is absolutely crazy. And of course, they're not good enough to end up anywhere on this graphic. This is who BetUS TV likes to win the Western Conference. Of course, Oklahoma City is the team that everybody's going to be trying to catch over the next decade. They've been phenomenal this year. Can Joe Cronin put a plan in place that actually gets the Blazers to contention and actually gets them to contend long-term against the Oklahoma City Thunder? I have my reservations. But just speaking of this year, I actually really like Golden State as a dark horse contender. I don't think the odds are doing them enough justice. They're 20-2 with Jimmy Butler and Steph Curry. Of course, Steph Curry has championship experience. He's won multiple championships. Jimmy Butler has made a couple of finals, and playoff Jimmy Butler is nothing to mess around with. So if there's a team that's going to beat the Thunder, I actually really like the Golden State Warriors this year, as much as it pains me to say it. When I first saw this tweet, I thought there's nothing Joe Cronin could have done to not get this extension. There's been a lot of talk about Burt Cold meddling with the front office, and the ownership situation is still a mess. The Blazers haven't sold yet. And I think Joe Cronin's hiring in the first place kind of spoke to that. He had no general manager experience, which is fine, right? You got to get your start somewhere. But the Blazers did not interview a single candidate and did not compare Joe Cronin to candidates with more experience or just any other candidates in general. They just outright hired him. And then, of course, Cronin wanted to be super aggressive building around Dame. Didn't pull that off. Dame leaves town, the Blazers enter a rebuild. But now that they've won 35 games, it seems like the Blazers are ready to exit that rebuild. However, I don't believe they have enough future draft capital coming out of the rebuild, as they should. Most rebuilding teams normally end up with more than just one extra first-round pick and 2 swaps when they exit rebuild mode. And do the Blazers even really have an extra first-round pick? Because they still owe one of theirs to Chicago. They got 2 picks in 2029. They basically netted out at 2 swaps, and that's it. Now, the best 2029 first of Boston, Milwaukee, and Portland is obviously much more value than Portland's lottery-protected first to Chicago. But still, it's not enough draft capital. which would be okay if the Blazers had a blue chip prospect, a can't miss guy like a Cooper Flagg in this upcoming draft. They have some really nice pieces. I really like Denny Avdia. Shaedon Sharpe has a ton of potential, but it remains a question of if those guys will actually become true all-stars at some point. And basically this rebuild has given Joe Cronin very little margin for error to build a true contender. He doesn't have a bunch of draft capital to fall back on to draft that blue chip young prospect in the future with another team's pick. He might get lucky if Milwaukee is really, really bad in 2028, 2029, and 2030. But without having a ton of future draft capital, it's going to make it harder for the Blazers to trade for the right impactful pieces to really make a splash to build a contender. And without that blue chip young prospect to fall back on, the Blazers really, really have to hope that Shaedon Sharpe and Denny Avdia and Scoot Henderson reach their ceiling. More often than not, players are not going to reach their ceiling. They're going to fall somewhere in between their floor and their ceiling. They're going to fall somewhere in the middle. So I don't like that Joe Cronin has not given himself enough margin for error coming out of this rebuild where things are going to have to go pretty perfectly in order for this team to get to true contention down the line. Now, if you just want a playoff team, Joe Cronin is building you a playoff team. A team that can definitely make the first round right now. But I have my reservations about them actually building a team that can contend. But I don't even know if that's the ownership's goal long term. So one of the things that worries me about Joe Cronin moving forward is I don't think he's proven to be a good seller. You look at what he got back for Norman Powell, who was in All-Star conversations this year, and it was essentially nothing. You look at what he got back for Josh Hart. He got back a late first-round pick. That was okay, but then they drafted Chris Murray with it, who had his best game of the year last game, but has not lived up to Josh Hart's value. So that was another loss, but that was more so due to the Blazers not executing with that pick. You look at Cronin's inability to trade Jeremy Grant, who now is probably a negative contract, and Joe Cronin gave Jeremy Grant that contract. If the Blazers are stuck with that contract, that is a glaringly bad move. If Cronin can get any sort of value for Jeremy Grant this offseason, I think that's a win. And that would be a good answer to some of these worries, because I just don't think Jeremy Grant has any value on the trade market at this point. And also, I don't think the Blazers can start him next year. Avdia and Kamara are clearly better players. So that's something that's going to loom over this organization's head this offseason. For some reason, they still have Robert Williams III on the team. He's hurt again. Now, the Dame trade went okay. I think he got back a decent package. Tamani Kamara helps make that a decent package because he obviously has been phenomenal. But it's probably a little easier to sell a superstar coming off a season where he averaged 32 points per game than it is to sell Jeremy Grant this offseason or last offseason or a Robert Williams III or a Norman Powell. So outside of the Dame trade, I don't think Joe Cronin has proven that he's able to effectively sell pieces. And that's what the Blazers are going to have to do going forward in order to lock in on their young core. They're going to have to trade an Anthony Simons. They're going to have to try and trade a Jeremy Grant. They drafted Donovan Clingan 7th overall last year to take over for DeAndre Ayton long term. Robert Williams III is a piece that they should try and sell. I thought this offseason was going to be a monumental offseason for Joe Cronin to either prove that he's capable of selling and capable of picking a direction. So I don't really like giving him this extension before this offseason. His tenure has been defined by not fully committing to a direction. The Blazers wanted to be aggressive building around Dame, but then they tanked his final 2 years in Portland, and in the final year didn't make a single move during the offseason other than drafting a 19-year-old point guard to replace Dame with. And in the rebuild, they've been paying Jeremy Grant and DeAndre Ayton a ton of money. Their backcourt of the future, Scoot Henderson and Shaedon Sharpe, are blockaded a little bit by Anthony Simons, who's still on the team. So the Blazers haven't really 100% committed to the rebuild. Normally, rebuilding teams aren't paying Jeremy Grant and DeAndre Ayton, Matisse Thybulle, Robert Williams $85 million a year. So I thought this offseason was a really good litmus test coming up. But Blazers ownership didn't view it as such, obviously, as they gave him an extension. I think my biggest worry with this ownership group is they are not committed to winning a championship or building a contender long term. And if they really aren't, then Joe Cronin is doing a pretty good job. A lot of my critiques about the moves that this team makes or doesn't make comes down to trying to build a contender long-term, trying to compete with OKC long-term. While the Blazers are taking some positive steps, I don't know if they're really on the path yet to being that type of team. It's going to be difficult to get there. Joe Cronin's going to have his work cut out for him, if that is truly the goal. But let me know what you think of Joe Cronin getting a contract extension down in the comment section below. Who do you think wins the West? Who do you think wins the West? Shout out to BetUS TV for that. And I'm out of here. Catch you next time. Until then, as always, peace out. Go Blazers.